The most anticipated series of the season begins tonight. Mets vs. Braves. I'll preview it all on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. This episode is brought to you by Booking.com, Booking.yeah. The right state can make you a fan of any city, even your baseball rivals. Book today on Booking.com, the official accommodation partner of Major League Baseball. Get the Booking.com app today. All right, so let's talk about this series. Mets versus Braves, 2-game lead for the Mets heading in. It's going to be an incredible series one way or the other, and it's either going to end with a clinched playoff berth if the Mets can win the series. If they take one game, you're still happy because the Mets will control their destiny going into the final series of the season. They'll still hold a 1-game lead over the Braves, or it's going to end in an absolute disaster like it did in 2022. And I think to ignore the elephant in the room is not to give this series proper context. So we're going to go right head on into it. This feels a lot like 2022 in the sense that it's Mets versus Braves. The Mets hold the lead, and you are waiting for the shoe to drop. And I get that because I'm a Mets fan too, right? I have seen, geez, voice cracked bad there. We're going to leave that in. But I've seen it all. I have experienced every heartbreaking loss with you, and I remember that series vividly. But I really wanted to go back and try to remember September of 2022. What happened leading in? So if you go back, August ends. Brandon Nimmo in the final game of that month robs the home run for Jacob deGrom. Mets win that game against the Dodgers by a score of 2-1. That's when everyone said baseball at Citi Field peaked. The Mets peaked with that game. What we've all forgotten is they actually won the next game. Chris Bassett beat the Dodgers. The Mets won that series, and then they beat the Nationals the following one after that. But there was a skid where the Mets could have won this division if they played better. There was an 11-game stretch where they went 4-7. So that was a real turning point for the Mets where they let the Braves get a little bit closer. That span ended on my birthday. They lost the final game from that stretch on September 14th, 2022. The Mets held a half a game lead in the division over the Braves after that loss. But the Mets would reel off 6 wins in a row after that. The 5th of those 6 wins allowed them to clinch a playoff berth. That was in Milwaukee. Then they won the final game there. Or excuse me, they won the following game there. They actually lost the final game of that series. But when they completed that 6-game winning streak before that loss, they held a game lead over the Braves, and they were able to maintain that even though they went 3-3 over the 6 games leading into that series. They lost the final game of Milwaukee. They went into Oakland, won a 3-game set. Then they split a 2-game set against the Marlins at home before they headed to Atlanta to face the Braves. 1-game lead going into that series. A little bit different than this one with the 2-game lead. Now, the big talking point going into that series in 2022 was the fact that the New York Mets were 1 win away from getting the season series tiebreaker. They had won 9 of their first 16 matchups against the Braves. Back then, these teams faced each other 19 times a year instead of 13. So 1 win gave the Mets the tiebreaker, which ultimately was the demise of their season because the Braves swept the series, got the tiebreaker. The Mets would go on to sweep the Nationals, ended up even with the Braves in the division. Both won 101 games, but the Braves took it on that tiebreaker. Now, you might remember that series being an absolute bludgeoning of the New York Mets, but they actually lost 3 close games. First one, score of 2-5 or 5-2. Braves then won 4-2, then they won 5-3. So all of them were close, but the Mets offense never got going, and that was what doomed them in the playoffs as well. Mets bats are hot right now. But moreover, if you compare what the Mets are this year to what they were in 2022, you compare the Braves of 2022 to the Braves of 2024, these are completely different teams. The shoe's sort of on the other foot. Yes, the Mets entered this series with a lead similar to 2022. But in 2022, they led the division nearly wire to wire, and it was only stumbling to the Braves that had them cough it up. But the Braves were the Mets of 2024 back in 2022. They were the best team in baseball from June on, erasing a really bad start, similar to what the Mets have done this year. That time, the Braves were the stalking horse. This year, that's the Mets. The Braves have endured so many injuries this year. It's just been one after the other. They have not felt like a team of destiny, a team that's meant for October. Honestly, if you really ask their fan base, they don't love this team. This isn't a team that they're going to go back on, man. Oh, I'll remember the 2024 Braves where everybody got hurt, our offense went quiet for weeks at a time, and we did get a Cy Young season from Chris Sale, but that's about it. If they make it, that will probably be the narrative. Man, Chris Sale saved our season, but this has not been a good year for the Atlanta Braves. We know in this division long term, the Braves are still at the top, even ahead of the Phillies, in my opinion. They still have the longer history of doing this. The Phillies are probably right there, but you know what? I look at the Mets and I think that what they've done this season is more sustainable than 2022. Obviously, I'm armed with hindsight because I watched the disaster that was 2023. But the 2022 Mets, that's a team that had Scherzer, DeGrom at the end, Bassett, different club. This team now, even though it was also built through free agency, it wasn't built through aggressive spending in free agency. It was built through intelligent spending in free agency. It was built through a president of baseball operations in David Stearns, who has shown he has the ability to create a winning infrastructure, because the team the Mets are going to finish their season against, the Brewers, have a roster that if you looked at on opening day, you'd say, how are they going to win the NL Central handedly? But year over year, they're the best team in that division because of the groundwork that David Stearns laid. So now it's the David Stearns version of the Mets. And it feels like they're just on the precipice of what could be a very long run. You're seeing young players like Francisco Alvarez, Mark Vientos, now Luisangel Acuña, step into the limelight and deliver big moments. Who was the great young player in 2022? That was a veteran team. And yes, they got great years from Lindor, Alonso, Jeff McNeil, Starling Marte, Mark Canha. But it was a veteran group. Now looking back, you see why it wasn't quite as sustainable, especially when we look at the rotation. So now you compare this current team and the vibes that the Mets carry into this series. They just went up against Zach Wheeler, Sunday Night Baseball, with Tyler McGill and found a way to win. I think this is a Mets team that is determined, that knows that they control their destiny and doesn't want it to just be win one game and then test your luck against the Brewers. No, I think this is a Mets team that wants to finish the business right now and beat the Braves to clinch the playoff berth. That's it. It's that simple. You win 2 games right now against the team that's trying to chase you down, you are in. You have the tiebreaker. You can't be thwarted by a tiebreaker. You can win. You can control your fate right now. Here's the weirdest, eerie feeling, though, that brings you back to 2022, and it makes you just wonder if there is some type of a storm cloud, quite literally, over the Mets as a franchise. And if this is a collapse and they don't make the playoffs, yeah, it's a disappointment now. We could have said for weeks and months prior, if the Mets just got to this series, which I said on this show, if they got to this series with a chance where they were even with the Braves or they were close enough where they could win a series and put themselves in position to make the playoffs, I said the season would be a win, but now the expectations have changed. Here's that eerie thing, though. There's a hurricane barreling towards Atlanta. 2022, my dad and I had a trip planned to go over to Atlanta and to catch all 3 games of this series. A couple things happened. We both got COVID like right before, and a hurricane ripped through our state. And we live in South Florida, for those of you who don't know. And the highways were all messed up, and it just didn't make sense to brave the our sickness, which we were still on the mend, and then also to drive all the way across the state to get to those games. So we did not go, and then we watched from home as the Mets got swept. Now, once again, there's a hurricane. This one is not supposed to get to Atlanta until Thursday. The other one, it came through first, I think, if I'm remembering it right, or it came through Florida and sort of missed Atlanta completely, and they ended up being fine. I think it's actually how it went down. But this one is supposed to end up in Atlanta. It doesn't seem like there's any threat of Tuesday being postponed or anything. They're going to play. Wednesday, it seems very likely they will play. Thursday, very doubtful if the current track holds. Now, you never know with a hurricane. It can go left and miss Atlanta and they can be fine. But this could hold some serious implications for the Braves because not only do they play this series, they're going to play another one against the Royals, who have a lot of playoff stuff to sort out here. So Major League Baseball is hoping the weather's on their side. If something happens, we're going to cover that later because it's too frustrating and mind-numbing to try to think about the scenarios. There's a world the Mets win the first two games of this series, they clinch, and it shouldn't matter. But then the Diamondbacks lost tonight, so the Mets are now half a game above them. But the Braves are, game and a half back. If the Braves catch the Diamondbacks, they have the tiebreaker on them. There's a world where this game gets rained out. The Mets that already clinched, but Major League Baseball on Monday before a wild card round might need the Mets to play the Braves to decide who's in the other wild card series. I don't know. So we're not going to address that unless it becomes a thing. Hopefully these series just get played. So let's just now preview this series as if this hurricane that's looming is not going to impact things, in which case we got 3 games coming up, Mets versus Braves this week right now, that very well could decide the season. And I'm excited because I believe in this Mets team. I'm going to tell you why as we go through first the hitting on each side, then the pitching matchups. We'll talk about hitting in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience are what brings home the winning trophy. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, and style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's guaranteed fit is only available to U.S. customers. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. The goal is to get to 10,000 subscribers by the end of the season, so I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, so let's talk about the hitting for each of these teams. On the year, the Mets have been the better offensive team, but if you look at September, these teams are pretty much neck and neck. The Braves are 6th in Major League Baseball in home runs. The Mets are 4th, but it's a 1-homer difference. You look at OPS, the Braves actually hold a 12-point lead, 755 to 743. The Mets have scored 6 more runs. So their offenses have been mirroring each other this month. You look at the specific hitters. Michael Harris had 7 home runs to lead the Braves in September. 16 RBIs, which trails only Matt Olson, who has 21 RBIs. Harris has an OPS of 937. Olson has an OPS over 1,000. Jorge Soler has driven in 12 runs. He scored 14. He has a 910 OPS. Marcell Ozuna has been hitting 329 in September, getting on base at a 417 clip, but has not led to a lot of runs. He hasn't scored a bunch, and he's only hit 1 home run, has only driven in 3, 842 OPS because he has started to really struggle in that slugging department. If you look at the top 5 in the Braves lineup, it's better than the top 5 in the Mets lineup right now. You got Harris. You got Ozzie Albies, who just got inserted back into the lineup. He's a wild card. Has not been great in 3 games since coming back, but it's Ozzie Albies. You never know. You have Marcell Ozuna, Matt Olson, Jorge Soler. But you look at the bottom 4 of their lineup. Ramon Laureano, Gio Urshela. These are guys that they picked up off of waivers or just signed. I can't even remember specifically, but guys that were cut from other teams that they were able to pick up to plug into situations where they've had injuries Austin Riley is out, right? So that's why I got Gio Urshela in there. And then Ramon Laureano has been playing a lot for them. I believe Jared Kelenic is out too, if I'm not mistaken, right? The other guys they have, Sean Murphy, Travis d'Arnaud. That's their catching tandem, Orlando Arcia. And I don't know how d'Arnaud's doing lately, but I know Murphy's had a down year. I know Arcia's had an abysmal offensive season. And I believe d'Arnaud has tailed off after a good start. Look at the Mets lineup. The top of their lineup, we don't even know what it is day to day right now because you don't have Lindor, or they haven't had Lindor. We'll see if he comes back for this series. But if it's a Lindorless Mets, it's Iglesias, Nimmo, Alonso somewhere in your top four. Against Zach Wheeler, Mark Vientos batted, seventh? Seventh. They had Vientos, Taylor, Acuña at the end of their lineup against Wheeler on Sunday. So when you look at the top 4 or 5 hitters, who are they for the Mets? I would say, regardless of order, it's Iglesias, Nimmo, Alonso, Vientos. And then 5, currently Alvarez. But if you're just looking at the length of the season, maybe it's Winker, JD Martinez, like that DH platoon, whatever it ends up being here. But overall, I would say top 5 in the lineup. The Braves got it, but they look at the depth. And it's no question the Mets have the much, much deeper team, and their bottom of the lineup is far scarier for an opposing pitcher. Lately, it's the bottom of the lineup that has been carrying the Mets because you have Tyrone Taylor, Francisco Alvarez, and recently Luisangel Acuña that have been absolutely crushing. Acuña hitting 379 to start his career, the 3 home runs, the 2 doubles, the triple. He's been amazing. Tyrone Taylor in September has earned the starting center fielder job because he's hitting 353 with a 450 on base and a 559 slug. He's got an OPS over 1,000. Francisco Alvarez has a 960 OPS on the month, or the last 15 games where he's hit those 5 home runs, OPS over 1,000. Then you have, during that same span of the last 15 days, you have Jose Iglesias, who's hitting over 400. I look at the New York Mets, and I think their length of lineup makes them a better offensive team right now. Brandon Nimmo had a monster game in Atlanta earlier this season. He just found his stride. Pete Alonso is still due for some moments, so we'll see what happens. You have whatever combination of Starling Marte, Jesse Winker, JD Martinez, even Harrison Bader, that'll be part of this team in some capacity across this series. Each of those guys could get a start here, start there, pinch hitting opportunity for Bader, defensive replacement. Those guys are veterans who could come through with a clutch hit at any time. We saw Marte do that to get the walk-off win against the Nationals at the top of last week. I think these will be well-pitched games where 5 runs might be the number you have to get to. And I believe the Mets can get to those 5 runs regardless of who's pitching for the Braves. Outside of maybe Chris Sale, which we'll talk about next, when you have a Francisco Alvarez who could tee one up, hit a 3-run homer, Nimmo, Vientos, Alonso, all of these guys have that ignitability, and there's still the subplot of Luisangel Acuña factor into this series in some capacity going up against his brother's team with his brother out. So that is a really fun little subplot. And then, of course, there's the potential return of Francisco Lindor. If Lindor comes back, if he's in the starting lineup batting leadoff on Tuesday night, what does that mean for the rest of the lineup? The emotional lift that would provide. If now you can go with Lindor at the top, Jose Iglesias batting second because he's been so good lately. You still want him at the top of your lineup. Brandon Nimmo, all right. Spencer Schwellenbach, watch out because if Lindor leads off the game with the double, Iglesias can get a base hit to drive him in. Nimmo could go yard, and it's 3-0 New York Mets. I really believe in the group that the Mets have, the depth that they have, with or without Lindor, to be able to score runs in this series. But the question is, are the Braves going to pitch themselves to a series victory? We're going to talk about the pitching matchups, who really has the edge. We'll go through it all in just a minute. First, though, another word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On Mets is brought to you by Booking.com, Booking.yeah. Summer travel heating up, especially travel for baseball games. It's time to explore those U.S. cities you've always secretly wanted to learn more about. Yes, we're talking about your rival cities. Why not head to Atlanta for this series? Or better yet, maybe go to Milwaukee. If the match clinched there, you can enjoy it. Head over there. The right state can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your rivals. with hotels, bed and breakfasts, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com. You might just find your perfect stay, even in your baseball rival city. Book today on Booking.com on the site or in the Booking.com app. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bet. It makes watching football on Sundays a lot more fun if you were going to get in on some of the betting action. And you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Again, that is $200 in bonus bets guaranteed, win or lose, when you place that first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. If you're an everyday listener of the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me. Anytime news breaks in the Mets, you can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways, and you get the live graphics sent to your phone each day so you know the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so let's talk about the pitching matchups in this series. Game 1, Luis Severino versus Spencer Schwellenbach. Schwellenbach has been a godsend to the Braves this year. With the injury to Spencer Strider, they have needed someone to step up, and it has been Schwellenbach, who has a 3.61 ERA across the season. But over his last 7 starts, he's got a flat ERA of 3. He did face the Mets at the end of July, and he went 7 scoreless, allowed just 2 hits, no walks, struck out 11. I went back, looked at that game. JD Martinez had a golden sombrero, 0 for 4, 4 strikeouts. Mark Vientos, 0 for 3, 3 strikeouts. Pete Alonso, 1 for 4 with 2 strikeouts. He did double off of Schwellenbach. When I look at the matchup here, you got to bench JD Martinez. You have to. I mean, you could make a case to bench Mark Vientos too if you have Lindor and you wanted to play Iglesias at third, Acuña at second. I'd still play Vientos. The ignitability that his bat provides you, the chance that he can put a charge into a mistake, I'd still rather have Vientos in the lineup regardless. But JD Martinez has looked lost, and there's a guy that's pitching that struck him out 4 times in their only ever matchup. I feel like this is not a good one for JD Martinez to start. The Mets have to limit his starts down the stretch. So I would look more towards the second game of the series against Chris Sale, which isn't an easy matchup for anybody, but at least JD Martinez has seen Sale a lot in his career and has a 754 OPS. It's not incredible, but it's good numbers. I feel like for this game, you go with Marte and Winker probably in the lineup. So Winker at DH, Marte in right field, Tyrone Taylor in center, of course, Nimmo on left, and your infield, either Lindor or Acuña at short. I think you still keep Vientos at third, and obviously you're going to go with Iglesias at second, Alonso at first, and of course, Francisco Alvarez catches, and I think he probably catches all 3 games of this series. It's that important. So I look at this matchup, and I still think this is one where the Mets are going to have to find a way to score some runs off of Spencer Schwellenbach, and I don't think he's untouchable. I think they can do that. Meanwhile, you got Luis Severino going. Sevy faced the Braves twice this year. Each time he went 5 innings, allowed 2 runs. The Mets need a little more length here from Sevy, although they did have the day off today to rest up that bullpen. Now let's talk about game 2. Chris Sale versus David Peterson. Now, I said JD Martinez would probably start this game. I said the 754 OPS. When I was doing that, looking at Mets with their stats against Sale, a lot of guys haven't faced him much. Remember, he was in the American League for a long time. Francisco Lindor has, and Lindor is 14 for 34 against Chris Sale in his career. 4.10 average. I also looked to see when Chris Sale faced the Mets this year. He went 7 1/3, allowed 2 runs on 2 hits, struck out 9. How did the Mets score those 2 runs? Francisco Lindor hit a home run. So if I'm the Mets, to me, the priority is getting Lindor in the lineup to face Chris Sale. It's not an easy matchup. Hey, you haven't played in over a week. Come back and face the Cy Young for the National League this year, but he sees him well in his career from the right side. So that's the game I want Lindor, and hopefully he's in for all 3 games. Now, the Mets walked off the Braves in that game when Sale started. Jeff McNeil drove in Jose Iglesias in the 10th inning for the Mets to win. Luis Severino actually started that game, so it's 5 innings, 2 runs. But Jose Butto pitched 3 scoreless out of the pen. Edwin Diaz pitched a scoreless ninth. Phil Maton covered the top of the 10th before the Mets walked it off. Lately, though, no one has won when Chris Sale's on the mound for the Braves. They've won their last 8 starts when Sale takes the hill. On the season, they're 22-7. Now, Chris Sale is going to pitch against David Peterson, and Peterson is, a good option. The Mets are 14-6 when he starts. They've lost his last 3 starts, though. Now, you look back, the start in Philly was not his fault. 7 1/3, really strong pitching from David Peterson. They lose a close one. That's not on him. The most recent one, though, against Philly, that is a little more on him. And then, of course, you have the game against the Blue Jays, which is a little more on Peterson. The Mets had an option here. They could have gone Jose Quintana instead of David Peterson. You look at the season, and there isn't a favorable matchup between those two as far as who pitched better against Atlanta this year. Both of them have pretty much been the same thing. 5 innings, 4 runs or 3 runs allowed. For Peterson, it was 4 runs on 4 hits, 3 walks, 7 strikeouts. For Quintana, 4 runs in one of his starts, 3 runs in the other one, both never getting through the 6th inning. When you look at Peterson's career at Truist Park, his ERA is 6.66. Not great. They could have gone to Quintana again, and Quintana has been electric lately, or at least lights out, whatever you want to describe it as. Last 5 starts, only allowed 1 run, ERA of 0.28, best in baseball. But I think this shows you who the Mets view as their number 3 starter. You're already starting to play scenarios in your head about a playoff series, whoever the Mets face off against. You're going to go Manaea game 1. If you don't need to use Luis Severino at the end of this season for a game 162, then you're going to have him ready to go for game 2. And then game 3, who is it going to be? This choice tells me it will be David Peterson. The Mets front office believes David Peterson is a better pitcher than Jose Quintana, and I tend to agree with him. So yes, past history in Truist Park, not great, but you know what? This is a different David Peterson. I'm excited to see him get that assignment in game 2 against Chris Sale, and crazier things have happened. The Mets just beat Zach Wheeler with Tyler McGill. Can they beat Chris Sale, the clear front runner for Cy Young with Peterson? Might happen. But if it doesn't, and the Mets at least took game 1, game 3, Max Fried versus Sean Manaea. This would be an amazing pitching matchup. Fried has faced the Mets once this year. He threw 7 no-hit innings, walked 3, struck out 5. So, it's not a great matchup for the Mets, but you feel good when Manaea's on the mound. 3.29 ERA in the season, 178 innings pitched, 2.95 ERA. This will be his last start of the regular season. So he's going to get over 180. He should finish with the sub 3.5. It's a great year for Manaea. Lately, his whip over his last 15 starts, 0.87. Over his last 7 starts, 0.65. Whip is walks and hits over innings pitched. So if your whip over 7 starts is 0.65, that means you've been giving up less than a base runner per inning. In this case, that's what, not great at math, 3 every 5 innings, something like that. It's pretty impressive what Sean Manaea has done. The Mets are 23-8 when he takes the hill. They've won his last 8 starts, and they've won 15 of his last 17 starts. So that's the guy you want on the mound. Hopefully the Mets can win one of the first 2 games. And if that's the case, is rubber match Sean Manaea on the mound with the chance to clinch? I love the New York Mets chances. So we'll see how this whole thing plays out. The Braves have a great bullpen, 3rd best in baseball in ERA this year. The Mets bullpen has hit its stride lately. So it's going to be a lot of fun. These are playoff games taking place in September, and I'll be covering every pitch of it here with Locked On Mets. We're going to do shows throughout the week. I think for the first game of this series, it's just going to be your typical recording. I'll have a show ready for you for Wednesday morning tomorrow. Beyond that, if the Mets win that game and they're in position to clinch, once they get to that point, if and when they clinch, I will go live after that game, and then I'll still do a follow-up show beyond that. So what I want you to do, if you're a new listener, definitely make sure you subscribe, follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube right now, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss it. Whenever I go live, put the notifications on as well, so you will get a notification if and when I go live after one of these games. You also want to check out another post-game show at the Locked On Podcast Network. You can find Locked On New York Sports, which is our new YouTube channel that is a post-game reaction channel for all New York sports teams. So Mets, Yankees, Giants, Jets right now. Basketball season is going to enter there soon. So make sure you subscribe over there and check out all of our coverage here as we finish off this amazing season for the New York Mets. I'll be back with another show tomorrow. And thank you all for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Not for your second watch. Head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports, talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.